El Paso, Texas, March 1972. The sun is baking the desert floor at 104 degrees, and on the set of The Getaway, the king of cool just walked off. Not a tantrum, not a negotiation, a complete abandonment. Steve McQueen, the biggest movie star in the world, climbed into his truck and disappeared into the dust, leaving a $30 million production in ruins. The crew stood frozen. The director sat silent, and Ali MacGraw, his co-star, and the woman he was falling in love with, knew something nobody else did. This wasn't about ego. This was about survival, life and death, his soul or his sanity. Here is the story. El Paso in March of 1972 was a furnace wrapped in barbed wire, the kind of heat that makes your shirt stick to your spine before you finish your first cup of coffee. The crew of The Getaway had been stationed there for weeks, shooting in abandoned buildings, dusty back alleys, and sun-scorched parking lots that shimmered like mirages. This wasn't a glamorous Hollywood production. This was gritty, real, dangerous. And Steve McQueen was at war, not with the heat, not with the crew, with himself. By 1972, McQueen was untouchable. He was the highest-paid actor in the world. Bullet, The Great Escape, The Thomas Crown Affair. Every movie he touched turned to gold. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. He had the cars, the bikes, the houses, the fame. He was living the American dream at full throttle. But inside he was suffocating. His marriage to Neil Adams, the woman who had stood by him through the lean years, the brutal years, the years when he was nobody, was crumbling. Not loudly, not with screaming matches or tabloid headlines, quietly, painfully, like watching a building collapse in slow motion. They had children. They had history. But history, McQueen was learning, doesn't keep you warm at night when your soul is empty. And then there was Ali MacGraw. Ali was America's sweetheart. She had just come off Love Story, the biggest romantic tear-jerker of the era. She was elegant, educated, sophisticated, everything Steve wasn't. She was married, too, to producer Robert Evans, one of the most powerful men in Hollywood. Their marriage looked perfect from the outside. Parties in Bel Air, red carpets, magazine covers. But perfection, as Steve knew, was just another word for prison. The tension on the set of The Getaway was suffocating. Director Sam Peckinpah, a genius with a drinking problem and a god complex, was pushing everyone to the edge. He wanted authenticity. He wanted blood. He wanted his actors to feel the desperation of criminals on the run, and he was willing to break them to get it. Steve and Ali's chemistry was undeniable, electric, dangerous. Every scene they shot together crackled with something the camera couldn't quite capture, but everyone could feel. They were falling in love in front of 100 crew members, and everyone knew it. Neil knew it, Robert Evans knew it, Peckinpah knew it, and he used it. This wasn't just a movie set. This was a powder keg with a lit fuse, and Steve McQueen, the man who never backed down from a fight, was about to explode. Steve had always been a fighter. He had to be. Born to a teenage mother who abandoned him. Raised in reform schools, where weakness got you beaten, or worse. He learned early that the world didn't give you anything. You took it, you fought for it, you bled for it. That hunger, that rage, that refusal to quit had made him a star. But it had also made him a man at war with everyone, including himself. On the set of The Getaway, that war was reaching a breaking point. Peckinpah was relentless. He demanded take after take, pushing Steve and Ali through physically exhausting scenes in the brutal Texas heat. There was no air conditioning, no luxury trailers, just dust, sweat, and the constant pressure to deliver. Peckinpah wanted raw emotion, and he knew how to get it. He would insult, provoke, push buttons until his actors snapped. Steve could handle that. He had dealt with tyrants before, But what he couldn't handle was the chaos inside his own head. Every night he would call Niall back in Los Angeles. Dutifully, painfully, she would ask how the shoot was going, and he would lie. He would tell her it was fine. The movie was fine. He was fine. But his voice, that gravelly, weathered voice that had charmed millions, couldn't hide the truth. He was falling apart, and every day he would see Ali. Ali MacGraw was unlike any woman Steve had ever known. She wasn't a starlet trying to cling to his fame. She wasn't intimidated by his reputation. She challenged him, made him think, made him feel things he thought he had buried years ago. She saw through the tough guy persona, through the king of cool facade. And she saw the frightened boy underneath, the one who had never been loved the way he needed to be loved. Quick question, have you ever had a secret that was eating you alive? A truth you couldn't speak but couldn't escape? Let us know in the comments. Steve's secret was simple and devastating. He was in love with Ali MacGraw, and it was destroying him. He tried to fight it, tried to bury it under professionalism and discipline. But every scene they shot together, every moment their eyes met, the lie got harder to maintain. The crew noticed, Peckinpah noticed, and worst of all, Steve noticed. He was a man who prided himself on control. Control over his career, control over his image, control over his emotions. But love, real love, doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't care about your plans or your pride. It just takes you. And Steve McQueen was not a man who liked being taken. The tension built day after day. The heat, the exhaustion, the guilt, the desire. It was all pressing down on him like a vice, and he could feel himself cracking. He started showing up late to set, snapping at crew members, drinking more, sleeping less. Neil could hear it in his voice during their nightly calls. Ali could see it in his eyes between takes. Something was going to break. Everyone knew it. They just didn't know when. And then, on a scorching afternoon in late March, it did. It was supposed to be a simple scene. Steve and Ali's characters, Doc and Carol McCoy, were on the run after a bank robbery gone wrong. They were desperate, exhausted, clinging to each other as the world closed in around them. It was the emotional heart of the film, and Peckinpah wanted it perfect. They had been shooting for 6 hours, take after take. The same lines, the same movements, the same emotions dredged up again and again until they felt raw and exposed. The sun was a hammer beating down on them. The crew was exhausted. Ali was exhausted, and Steve was at the end of his rope. Peckinpah called for another take, and another, and another. Steve could feel it happening, the walls closing in, the air getting thinner. He looked at Ali, standing there in the Texas dust, sweat streaking her face, her eyes locked on his, and he felt something inside him snap. Not anger, not frustration, something deeper, something he couldn't name. He turned to Peckinpah and said, "I'm done." Peckinpah, perched in his director's chair with a bottle of whiskey at his side, looked up. "What? I'm done. I can't do this anymore." The set went silent. 100 people stopped moving, stopped breathing. Steve McQueen didn't walk off sets. Steve McQueen didn't quit. But here he was, pulling off his microphone, dropping it in the dust, and walking away. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody spoke. They just watched as the biggest movie star in the world climbed into his pickup truck, started the engine, and drove off into the desert, leaving a cloud of dust and a stunned crew in his wake. Ali stood frozen. She knew what this was about. She knew because she felt it, too. This wasn't about the movie. This wasn't about Peckinpah or the heat or the endless takes. This was about two people standing on the edge of a cliff, knowing that one more step would send them both tumbling into the abyss, and Steve had just jumped. Peckinpah finally broke the silence. "Somebody go get him." But nobody moved, because everybody knew that if Steve McQueen wanted to disappear, there was no finding him. Except Ali knew better. She didn't ask permission, didn't wait for instructions. She walked off the set, got into her car, and went after him. She found him 2 hours later at a bar on the outskirts of El Paso. Not a Hollywood bar, not a fancy hotel lounge, a dive. The kind of place where nobody cared who you were or what you did for a living. Steve was sitting at the bar, a half-empty bottle of beer in front of him, staring at nothing. Ali sat down next to him, didn't say a word, just sat there in the dim light and the smell of stale cigarettes, and waited. Finally, Steve spoke. His voice was rough, tired, barely above a whisper. "I can't do this, Ali." "Do what?" "Pretend. Act like this isn't happening. Act like I don't feel what I feel." Ali's heart was pounding. She knew what he was saying, knew what it meant for both of them. "Steve, I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Simple. Devastating. True. Ali closed her eyes. She had known. Of course she had known. But hearing him say it out loud made it real, made it impossible to ignore. "Steve, we can't—" I know we can't. But I can't go back on that set and pretend anymore. I can't look at you every day and act like you're just my co-star. I can't call my wife every night and lie to her. I can't keep doing this." Silence. Pure silence. Ali reached out and took his hand. It was rough, calloused, scarred from years of doing his own stunts and living hard. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the man beneath the legend. The man who was tired, broken, desperate for something real. "Then don't pretend," she said softly. "Come back to the set, finish the movie, and then we'll figure out the rest, together." Steve looked at her, and for the first time in weeks, the weight on his chest lifted just a little. Not gone, but lighter. "You mean that?" "I mean that." He nodded slowly, finished his beer, stood up, and together they walked out of that bar and back into the Texas night. The next morning, Steve McQueen was back on set. He didn't apologize, didn't explain. He just looked at Peckinpah and said, "Let's work." And they did. The scenes they shot in the days that followed were some of the most powerful of Steve's career. Raw, honest, filled with the kind of emotion you can't fake, because it wasn't acting anymore. It was truth. What happened after that day in the bar changed everything. Steve and Ali finished The Getaway, and then, as promised, they figured out the rest. Steve left Neil. Ali left Robert Evans. 2 marriages, 2 families, shattered in the wake of a love affair that had started in the Texas desert. Hollywood was scandalized. The tabloids had a field day. America's sweetheart and the king of cool destroying their perfect lives for each other. But Steve didn't care. For the first time in his life, he had chosen something that wasn't about image or career or control. He had chosen love. Real, messy, complicated love. Steve and Ali married in 1973. For a while, it was everything they had hoped for. They were inseparable, obsessed with each other. But the truth about love that nobody tells you is that it doesn't fix you. It doesn't heal your wounds or erase your past. And Steve McQueen carried a lot of wounds. He was possessive, jealous, controlling. The same intensity that had made him a star made him a difficult man to love. Ali, independent and strong-willed, clashed with him constantly. The passion that had brought them together became the fire that burned them apart. Their marriage lasted 5 years. By 1978, it was over. But here's what was hidden for decades, what nobody knew until years after Steve's death in 1980. Ali MacGraw kept a letter Steve wrote to her on that night in El Paso, the night she found him in the bar. He never gave it to her then, But years later, after the divorce, after the bitterness had faded, he sent it to her. In that letter, Steve wrote about the terror he felt that day. Not of losing the movie, not of the scandal, but of losing himself. He wrote about how walking off that set was the first honest thing he had done in years, and he wrote about how Ali, by coming after him, by refusing to let him run, had saved his life. That letter was never made public during Steve's lifetime. Ali kept it private, sacred. But she shared it in her memoir years later, and it revealed something the world had never seen. Steve McQueen, vulnerable, afraid, human. Steve McQueen walked off the set of The Getaway because he was a man who refused to live a lie. In a world where image was everything, where Hollywood demanded perfection and silence, Steve chose truth. It cost him his marriage. It cost him his reputation. But it gave him something more valuable, his soul. Ali MacGraw didn't save Steve McQueen that day in El Paso by convincing him to return to the set. She saved him by showing him that he didn't have to face his demons alone. That love, real love, means standing in the fire with someone, even when it burns. Their marriage didn't last, but the impact they had on each other did. Steve spent his final years living on his terms, away from Hollywood, finding peace in the desert he had once tried to escape. And Ali carried his memory, and that letter, as a reminder that sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is walk away. And sometimes it's coming back. So here's the question. Have you ever walked away from something because staying would have destroyed you? And if someone came after you, would you have had the courage to return? Steve McQueen did. And that's why his legend endures. Not because he was perfect, but because he was real. And unfortunately, they don't make men like Steve McQueen anymore.